We're going to start on time, guys. We want to start exactly on the dot. This is going to be recorded, but we want to make sure that we honor those who are here on time. And we have so much to unpack today that I want to make sure that we get this show on the road. This is such an important topic. And we want to just be super, super intentional with this hour and a half. Please mark your just make sure you make a note. Today is an hour and a half. Normally we go for an hour, but because again, we have so much to unpack, we're going to have Kendall Bonner obviously not only give us a little bit of industry, an industry overview on the latest and the greatest with the NAR settlement and what to expect on August 17th, but also how our brokerage has also taken a position and is leading the way. My name is Veronica Figueroa. If you don't know who I am, if you do, thanks so much for joining back in on GAP. Today we are going to be discussing the NAR settlement. It's, as we get closer and closer, this has been something that we have been following every single day, minute by minute. And our wonderful leadership team has done such a great job to stay in the know and to really interpret this information and to foresee some of the changes that they expect that will take place from not only just the settlement, but also how our brokerage will comply. And I'm so proud to introduce Kendall, who is our VP of Industry for eXp Realty and a dear friend of mine that I absolutely love. And she is going to be breaking this down for us. And then hopefully we might have a couple minutes for Q&A. But without any further ado, I want to go ahead and bring Kendall up. Hi, Kendall, are you there?
I'm here. Good morning.
Hi, Kendall is joining us all the way from Las Vegas at Inman, this will be a hot topic at Inman. This Inman, Las Vegas. It's been being discussed probably for the last few years, but now down to the wire. I'll see you tomorrow as we again continue to dive into this. But today you are going to do a breakdown, obviously, as to what has obviously transpired, where we're at, and of course our position as eXp and how we're leading the way. Also, with some of the decisions that we've already made, that people are saying that we are taking a stance, but also interpreting this based on exactly how the law is asking us to. And a lot of people are still in denial. So Kendall, I'm going to pass it on over to you so that you could pretty much inform us, educate us, and prepare us.
Yeah, thank you, Veronica. I appreciate that. And, just as a little comment, two things, Veronica was with me when I did a little miniature conversation about the litigation at Inman Disconnect last year. So she can testify to the fact that I have been talking about this stuff on stages and in the community for about almost 2 years now. So about a year and a half at least, but almost 2 years now. And it's been my pleasure to really try to help interpret what's happening for agents and leaders alike, right? And so a little bit about my background, and I'm actually going to share my screen here. There we go. All right, so again, about me. So my name is Kendall Bonner. I am an attorney, Florida licensed attorney for 21 years now. I am a former broker owner, so I ran my own brokerage for almost a decade. I also started a team with my husband about 3 years ago, and I started my career in real estate as a listing agent. So I've been in all the shoes, right? And so I think that gives me a unique perspective to help you guys interpret and understand, what's happening here. And let me just say this, it's not just a matter of following the law and or the settlement in these things. In this conversation, it is about understanding and best interpreting the best path forward as a brokerage. There's a lot of spaces in the NAR settlement that leave it open for broker interpretation. And this is where broker leadership really has to elevate itself, right? Because a broker at the end of the day is responsible for the agents that it employs, the consumers and customers that it works with. And so NAR is not able to tell us all the ways that we can do our business. It's not designed to do that. And so it's And this new change has left more space, I'll say, for interpretation. And I think in the short term, we are going to see a lot of brokers try to navigate and figure their way through this, because this is different, with what's happening today. And so there's going to be spaces for brokers to learn, and some will get it right, some may take a little longer to get it right. And what we're talking about today is going to be not just what's happening, but our best interpretation of what's happening and our path forward. And I'll do my best to build the picture so that you guys can clearly see and understand what's happening and where we're going from here. So, before I get into these slides, and for anyone who's seen this presentation before, I did add a couple slides and there's definitely more content. I've literally done this specific presentation I stopped counting, between 35 and 40 times in the last 4 weeks. So I've talked about this a lot all over the country. So I welcome you here today. I don't think you can hear this too many times. And every time I say it, it's a little bit different because I'm not reading a script. So I'm just telling you what I know based on what I've experienced, and also as well as the questions I know you guys have asked. So the first thing I want to say to everyone on this call is that I know there was some confusion from some eXp agents because of the fact there's the small handful of brokerages that have not settled yet. And I want to say to you, as an NAR dues paying member, you are covered by the settlement. You are protected. So I just want to clarify that for some of you, that this is, you are protected. Now, the other thing, as I'm going through these slides, you are going to have questions. I will do my best to get through these slides by the end of the hour. So we have 30 minutes for live Q&A. So please feel free to put your questions in the chat. However, we also may ask you to unmute yourself at the end to read, to go over some questions as well. So that is how we're going to do the questions here. So as we get started, the thing I like to address and level set for everyone is, what's changed, right? A lot of agents are still unclear, to be honest, about what's changed and what it actually means, these changes. So there's two main practical changes to the real estate sales process as a result of the NAR settlement. And I also want to tell you too, feel free to take pictures of and screenshots of the slides. I'll even point out which ones I think you should take screenshots of. Also take notes, right? Write this stuff down because it'll help you retain it. So with that being said, with these two main practical changes, the whole entire settlement agreement was 108 pages. I read all of them. But the two main changes that came out are the following. Number one, the removal of commissions off of the MLS. As you may recall, up until about a year ago or so, it was required that when you took a listing, you were required to offer a commission to the buyer agent, i.e. it was called a unilateral offer of compensation. And you couldn't even market your listing on the MLS without actually putting something in the commission field. And so as a result of this NAR settlement, not only did that rule go away, but the commission field has gone away, or will go away if it hasn't already in some markets. And not only that, we're not allowed to talk about buyer agent commission anywhere in the MLS. So you can't put it in the public remarks, you can't put it in the private remarks, you cannot bury it in a photo in the pictures in the photo gallery, right? You cannot talk about commissions and buyer agent commissions anywhere in the MLS. A lot of you guys are looking for workarounds, right? In fact, I got one this morning from someone out of California asking, can we put, the seller is willing to blah, 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 right? Fill in the blank. I would just caution you against, writing anything that remotely sounds like you are talking about commissions, okay? Because you do not want to get a fine from your MLS, and we'll get into that as well. You do not want to get in trouble. I've seen some people suggest, sellers willing to negotiate all terms, things of that nature. To me, you can perhaps, if your MLS allows that, you can put something like that in there, but I would caution you against it because the reality is if a seller lists their home for sale, they are willing to negotiate, right? It's inherent in the process. So, and I say that because no one gets a perfect offer, right? No seller ever gets a perfect offer. So every offer they get is an opportunity to negotiate. So I just want to remind you of that. The next thing I want to say here is listing agents, because the commissions have come off of MLS and you no longer have the requirement to offer a unilateral offer of commission, you only need to negotiate your own commission at the listing agreement. Again, listing agents, you are no longer responsible for negotiating both sides of the commission at the listing. Now, this doesn't mean you're not going to talk to a seller about buyer agent commissions, but I have another slide where we'll talk about that, what that looks like and how you'll have those conversations and what that, how that's going to change. But going forward, you are only going to request and work on obtaining commissions for your side of the transaction as the listing agent for the seller, right? That is it. The other thing that you may discuss with the seller is that with this removal of commissions off of the MLS, many MLSs are opting to add a field for concessions. There was a small paragraph in the settlement negotiation that carved out an exception for seller concessions to the buyer, that those concessions could be used for repairs, credits, and or buyer agent commissions, okay? But we'll talk about commissions or concessions a little later as well. And so, because I want to give you a cautionary tale on concessions or some food for thought on that, okay? So number one, a removal of commission off of MLS. And then the second major change is that the buyers now have to hire an agent, right? And sign an agreement hiring that agent before working with them and or showing, being shown homes. So that is also a second big, massive change nationwide for many agents. Now, there are some states, you may be on this call, where in your state in the last, I'll say recent past, when I say recent, for some, it was effective July 1st. For others, it was January 1st. For others, it could have been last year, depending on what territory you're in. You had these buyer agreements required, but the requirement for it to be done before even showing a property, that's pretty specific and unique to this NAR settlement. For the most part. And so this is a massive change for the majority of real estate professionals out there who either never used an agreement before or only got one at the time they wrote offers or things of that nature. Now, let me tell you, this is different than agency disclosure. Many real estate professionals across the country are used to just doing some sort of disclosure to the customer about their fiduciary duties for that customer. Let me remind you what your fiduciary duties look like. There's an acronym called OLDCAR to help you remember. So obedience, loyalty, disclosure, confidentiality, accounting of all funds, and reasonable skill, care, and due diligence, right? And so many of you may be used to getting a customer to sign a disclosure regarding your fiduciary, and maybe it had compensation in there or not, or maybe not, but at a minimum, many of you are used to that. Now, this new requirement of getting hired is a little different because the topic of getting hired by the customer and establishing your fee is very different than agency disclosure. And, the reason why this is a big deal is because buyer's agents, you are now responsible for determining your own value, right? And deciding between you and your client what your fee is going to be for the services that you perform. So this is super important. And this is a change, even for agents that are used to using agreements in the past. The big difference is between then and now and going forward is that you won't have the safety net of the MLS offering as a foundation for your fee, right? So you would know going into every showing very quickly what your fee portion was going to be from the seller. And that was a safety net even if you were using buyer agreements. So in a big way, everyone is experiencing this new change together, right? So and why this is important too is because in the past, if you recall, buyer agent commission field was private. It was not public for the most part. So what does that mean? That means that buyers did not know what their agents were being paid until 2 or 3 days before closing on the settlement statement. So this whole settlement, a big portion of the settlement, I should say, is to change that, to bring forth some transparency and disclosure between the parties on what's getting paid, on what they're getting paid, right? So, and this is also, I think, a good thing for buyer's agents, because you no longer are dependent upon a seller's agent, right? A listing agent, to tell you what your value is to the transaction and or what you're worth. So you get to determine that, you get to agree to that with your customer, and then negotiate going forward. And again, I'll talk to you guys a little bit about some mindset shifts I think you guys need to have there as well. So part of this conversation, in addition to agency being something you might want to discuss with your customer, another thing is whether the agreement is exclusive or non-exclusive. So I think on the buy side, this is a newer concept, so I'm going to take a moment to explain this more deeply so that you can get it and why it's important. So number one, let's talk about on the listing side, where you are probably already familiar with this concept. When you take a listing, it is typically an exclusive right to list with the seller, meaning the seller hires one agent to list and market their home for sale. And it doesn't matter who buys that home within the terms of that agreement, that seller is going to be paying that listing agent for the once that transaction closes. For example, if you worked with a for sale by owner, you wouldn't use an exclusive right to sell. You would use potentially, or most likely, a commission agreement, which is non-exclusive, which means that for sale by owner only pays you if you bring a buyer to that house in that transaction and it actually closes. So that for sale by owner would have an agreement with you, and if you bring the buyer, you get paid. If someone else brings the buyer, you as the would not get paid, right? So in other words, a for sale by owner, if they found their own buyer, they don't pay any agent. But they could also have multiple non-exclusive commission agreements with multiple agents. They would only pay the agent that actually helped them sell the home, right? So that's the difference between exclusive versus non-exclusive. So now we have this being more massively introduced on the buy side. So meaning a buyer can sign an exclusive agreement or a non-exclusive agreement with their agent. An exclusive agreement means that no matter what home they buy within the terms of that agreement, that buyer would owe a commission to that agent, versus a non-exclusive agreement means they would only pay that agent if that agent found them the home that they actually ended up transacting and purchasing, right? So what does this mean? This means that now we could see buyers signing more than one agreement. Not that they didn't before, but it definitely is a risk now. So this is an important question because we have a code of ethics, right? That tells us we are not allowed to infringe upon the exclusive relationship between a realtor and their customer. So this is how it worked in the past. A buyer and an agent would talk. An agent would ask the buyer, are you working with any other agents? The buyer would say yes or no. Let's say the buyer said yes. Some agents would stop here and refer them back to their other agent. Other agents would ask a second question, well, did you sign any, i.e. did you sign an exclusive relationship? The buyer would say yes or no. Let's say the buyer says yes, then definitely most agents stopped here and would refer them back to the original realtor. But now, with this new change, you will have to go a step further, which is asking them, did you sign an exclusive or non-exclusive relationship, right? And I will tell you, I think that most agreements are going to be very clear. Like if that buyer can go back and look at their agreement, it'll typically say exclusive at the top. I mean, I would recommend if a broker's using their own agreement or using a state agreement or a local MLS agreement, most of the time those agreements usually have bold letterings of stuff like that. So it should be pretty simple for a buyer to look at their agreement and be able to determine if it's an exclusive or non-exclusive agreement. But there is a world where a buyer can sign more than one agreement, especially if they're non-exclusive. What we do not want is for a buyer, though, to sign more than one agreement and owe two commissions to two different agents on a single transaction. We do want to prevent that. So it's important, realtors, that you have these detailed conversations with customers, especially if you're going to have them sign an exclusive or have them sign a non-exclusive agreement, that you make sure the customer understands what they're signing. So you as an agent need to understand, and then as well as the customer, you need to explain it to the customer and make sure it's clear to them what they're signing as well. So those are things that you can negotiate with your customer, is whether it's exclusive or non-exclusive. Another thing that you can negotiate with your customer is how long the agreement is. Is it 30 days, 3 months, 6 months, 1 year? You can negotiate whether it's for one property, one city, multiple cities, multiple counties, the entire state. If you work the entire state, I would not bind a client. I would not recommend binding a client under an entire state agreement if you are not willing to work the entire state. So be fair to yourself and the customer. But for those of you that live in border towns where people buy on both sides of the border and that's all within your working territory, you might have an agreement that covers 2 states, right? Everywhere you're licensed and you are legally able to sell real estate and you practically sell real estate. So those are things that you can do if you and your customer agree or need that. The other thing to be thinking about too is your process. You know, I know I know that this call is mixed, so there's people from all over the country on this call. I'll take it. But there's some of you, my lovely husband brought me coffee. Yay. Yay, Bill. There's people all over this country, but I know, for example, in Florida, right, where we have transaction brokerage and not dual agency, and a lot of agents are not used to getting a buyer agreement executed at all, much less this early in the process. The other thing I want to draw your attention to is your need to update your process. You are going to need to have, and I recommend some sort of listing, buyer presentation, consultation, conversation, strategy meeting, whatever you want to call it, prior to meeting and going to look at properties, the same way you would have a meeting with the seller before that you list their home. And what's the point of these meetings? The point of the meeting is to articulate your value, to have a conversation, build rapport, get to know them, go over the agreements, right? I highly recommend, as buyer agents, as you update your process, make sure in the meeting you are going over the agreement. Do not save the agreement to be sent via SkySlope or whatever mechanism you use for signatures without going over it with the customer. Make that a part of your process. The fact that you can communicate these documents and make them easy to understand for your client and be able to answer their questions as they're going through it. So the other thing that's important is the settlement agreement requires realtors to enter into a written agreement before touring homes, right? Before showing properties, with the following details. Number one, rate of compensation and how it's determined, right? So that is your fee, whether it's a percentage of the purchase price or you're charging a flat fee or something along those lines. That needs to be in your agreement, articulated in your agreement. The second thing is it needs to be definitive and objectively ascertainable. It cannot be open-ended. So I'm going to actually show you a slide here to visualize this. So for example, you cannot put a range, right? You cannot write whatever the buyer or whatever the seller is willing to offer or pay you. Please don't, you cannot write those into your agreements. That cannot be your fee, right? You cannot, write up to. And part of the reason why you cannot write up to is because of the next rule, which is your fee is capped. And I'll go back to the other slide, don't worry. At the amount that you gave in the agreement, you can accept less, you cannot accept more. But I just wanted to, if you want to take a screenshot of this, so, we're not telling you what numbers to charge, right? These are just numbers on the page for example purposes, right? You charge whatever you charge as a buyer agent, you pick your fee. And you negotiate that with your customer and get them to agree to pay you that in exchange for your value. But the other piece I like to say here in explaining this with objectively ascertainable is, you can tell a customer, I charge X for A, B, and C, and I charge Y for D, E, and F. Menu of services, as long as it's allowed in your state and it doesn't compete with your fiduciary duties, because that's usually the limitation, you can do that, right? But you cannot compete with your fiduciaries, right? So, so you cannot charge a fee for lesser fiduciary if your state requires that, okay? So anyhow, so your compensation has to be definitive. So I like to tell people to, you know, when you were a kid, people would say, use your words. I'm going to say, use your numbers, right? Your fee needs to be a number in some form, whether it comes in the form of a flat fee or percentage, you know, with a dollar sign or a percentage, doesn't matter to me, right? But it needs to be a number. Now, compensation is capped at this amount. That's another place where people have a ton of questions and challenges. And that is because, you know, of things like bonuses, right? Or a scenario where, let's say the seller is offering more compensation than what you've agreed to in your agreement. A lot of agents that have asked, you know, well, can I get the overage? And the answer is, if it's not written into your agreement, you cannot collect any overage in the difference between what's being offered and what you've agreed to, right? So you have to, you have a couple of options. One thing that a common question I get is, can I amend my agreement, right? And so the answer to, can you amend your agreement, is it depends. And I'm going to tell you why it depends. The first thing is, if you are going to attempt to amend your agreement, you need to do it before you show the property. Do not show the property and then try to amend your agreement with the customer. That's the equivalent of a bait and switch. So I just, as a best practice, do not do that, right? If you're going to attempt to amend it, you need to have that conversation with the buyer beforehand so that they are in agreement and they accept these terms before you perform the work, okay? So that's number one. So if you make an amendment, it needs to be before you show the property, not after. Number two, if you're going to amend the agreement, let me give you some food for thought. Number one, we amend purchase and sale agreements every single day, right? We amend the purchase price, we amend contingencies, deadlines, all kinds of things, right? But how, let me ask you this, how often do you amend a listing agreement? Almost never, very rarely, right? And why is that? It's because you've learned to write them well. And so you stick to those terms in that agreement. Same on the buy side, I suspect will happen going forward. Once agents get used to writing these agreements, I believe that as you get better at writing them, you'll get more comfortable and you will just accept the terms that you've agreed to, right? With your customer. And so you probably will want to amend them less and less. The second thing I want you to think about is the fact that you're going to have some buyers who say to you, Kendall, I love you. You are amazing. I want you to make as much money as possible, and I'll happily amend this agreement so you can collect the full fee that the seller is offering. And then you're going to have some clients that say to you, Kendall, I love you. I thought you were great, but absolutely not. If the seller has a penny more to give, it should come to me as a buyer and should reduce my costs and my expenses, right? So those are things so that's why I say it depends, because the customer has to agree to amend these terms, and some will and some may not. So you need to be prepared for that. The second thing I'll say to this is, I've been asked, well, what is a good strategy when I go to write my agreement well? Like, what are the best strategies for writing it if I want to avoid having to amend my agreements later? So I'm going to give you three approved strategies that you can leverage. The first one, I think, being the most difficult, which is you just charge the highest fee you think you're going to get, and you ask the buyer to sign an agreement stating that. The reason why is because you can always reduce your fee later. You can always accept less. So you don't need the words up to an amount, by the way, either. Don't write that into your agreement. You just put the number, whatever that is. But to me, if you can get a buyer to agree to that, knowing like, hey, you're going to be showing them DR Horton communities and you know you're entitled to this extra bonus or higher commission rate, you can put that number into your agreement. And always knowing that if they end up buying something else, and the commission, you can choose to lower your commission later if you decide to. That's one way you can do it. The second way you can do it is like I described earlier, like a menu. So in other words, you can say, I charge X% for resales, right? Or that's my fee. And then, but if I show you homes in the DR Horton, any DR Horton community, my fee goes to Y, or my fee is Y. That is something you can do. And so that's another way you can handle it, for example. And then a third way that you can handle it as a strategy specifically for my eXp agents on the call is you can have your traditional BBA, which your traditional fee, whatever fee that you charge, and then you can do a single property buyer representation agreement for that one, for 123 Main Street, where you know a particular fee is being offered. Right. So that is the third strategy that you can leverage as a way to cover all the bases and be able to collect those or take advantage of those opportunities should you and the customer agree to that. Right. So those are some ways that you can handle that. And number 4, you cannot state your services in free. In fact, unless in fact you are not going to get paid as a realtor by anyone. So for example, we had a question with an agent that said, hey, I work with sellers or with builders a lot. I have a particular builder I show most of that I do most of my transaction with, and they've agreed to pay me X. Can I put in my agreement with my buyer 0 because I already know what the seller is going to pay me? And the answer to that is, please do not do that. If your agreement with your buyer says your fee is 0, you have capped any seller from paying you anything more than 0, right? So if your fee states 0, especially if it's a fee before you show the property at 0, you are only going to be able to be paid 0, okay? So that's really important. The other thing that's important to note is virtual tours. If you are doing a virtual tour on behalf of a buyer, because they're out of state or something along those lines, you're doing a FaceTime video or some sort of, recorded video for them to show them the property because they're maybe perhaps doing a sight unseen offer, then you need to have an agreement in place before you do those virtual tours. That is important to get that in place. For those of you that are doing videos for Instagram, YouTube, for your website or your personal marketing, or video for your sellers as a marketing video, right? Or you're going to email it out to your entire database. Check out this hot new listing. You do not need an agreement in place. What's the difference? One, you have a specific customer you're working with. The other one, you do not. So I'm going to take a sip here while I change screens. So what's the newest news? Well, the first thing is we have this new deadline that is, now we are 15 business days. We are 3 weeks away from this, this effective date. Now, this effective date is a hard stop deadline, okay? Meaning your MLS and your local state associations may implement this deadline sooner than the 17th, but everyone will be converted by the 17th, okay? So what this means is, so a lot of people ask me, why do we have a new deadline or why do we have this deadline and is it going to change again? And I like to explain this so that you understand why this is likely not to change. Number 1, the judge preliminarily approved the settlement. Now, the judge did not finally approve it. The hearing for the final approval is not till the very end of November. That's the current date set. But the judge did preliminarily approve the settlement. And so what happened with that preliminary approval is that certain deadlines, notices were set. So some of those deadlines included, for example, the ability for brokerages and MLSs to opt in or opt out. Also, the class action notice date was set. Now, the NAR settlement agreement with the plaintiffs was tied to the date associated with the class action notice. And so that's why August 17th date was actually set, because it was tied to the class action notice date, okay? So that is why it's not likely to change. And that's why we moved from a guesstimate of mid-July to an actual date of the 17th. The 17th is a Saturday. And I jokingly say that NAR gave us as many business days as possible to make our adjustments. And so this is where I say that you have up until Saturday the 17th or your MLS dates or local association dates, if sooner, to adjust your documents accordingly, okay? So if you're a listing agent, you need to modify your listing agreements to remove the language about offerings of commission on the MLS. Why is that? Because after the 17th or sooner, it's going to be gone. You will no longer be able to comply with that term. So that's why it will go away. We do have a listing modification form that was created by eXp that got released last week. I will tell you this, if you have an active listing, you will execute this agreement, and this will not only remove the language about the listing coming off of MLS, but it also removes the co-broke requirement. So it will reduce, you need to reduce your commission if you were collecting a full, we'll say, a commission for both sides of the transaction. If you're leveraging this listing modification form by eXp, you will need to reduce your commission down to what your portion of the commission is, right? And then discuss with the seller how they, you still may recommend that they continue to still offer the difference, right? That for the buyer's agent, we're just going to have to market it differently because we cannot market that into the on the MLS, okay? So that is a big change. If you have a pending listing, I previously, before I saw the new agreement, was telling agents they need to also amend their listing because you're still removing the language. However, I would not recommend using the eXp version because that will, you still, as a listing broker, we still owe, let's say you go pending today and you're closing August 20th. If you have offering of co-broke commission today and that buyer's agent, that you're working with goes pending with you today, you as a cooperation rule, that's a part of the cooperation rule of the MLS, you still owe that commission on the 20th when it closes. So we as eXp still need to collect that from the seller, the entire fee, and then we split it on the settlement statement accordingly, according to what the MLS terms are, right? So so that's on both sides of the transaction. So if you're a pending buyer today, you're a buyer's agent, and you go pending on a buyer and there's an offering of MLS commission, you are, as long as you still close, even if you close after the 20th, you will still collect that. eXp will still allow you to collect that, okay? So even if it's pending, you go pending today and it's closing in December, okay? And there's a co-broke commission being offered and that's agreed to in the agreement, you can still collect that in December, right? From that listing broker, and that listing broker still needs to collect it, okay? So I hope I'm making that very clear for you that even though we have this new non-sharing of commission rule after the 17th, we will still honor offerings of commission that we make because it's required in the MLS by most of them, right? That if you offer it and you go pending, you have to pay it, right? So we're going to still honor the rules, right? We are honoring those rules. So if you go pending with an offering of commission in there, I recommend that you make a printout on the day that you go pending of what that MLS co-broke commission is. Whether it's your broker synopsis, if you're in Stellar MLS or whatever the sheet is called in your local MLS, that's a printout of what that offering of commission is. You need to print that and put that in your SkySlope file or your broker file if you're not at eXp, right? That is your evidence that you are entitled to the fee. And you want to have something where it shows the date that this is all matching. And that's, the date you went pending pending contract or pending escrow, whatever your language is and whatever state you're in, right? So that is important to understand. So if you're a buyer's agent, you want to have a printout of the MLS sheet. If you're a listing agent, you want to have a printout of the MLS sheet, load that into the file and make sure that stays in the file for you. For those of you that are taking listings today going forward and or working with buyers, you need to be talking to these buyers about these changes now. Oh my God, I can go 2 hours. I can't believe what time it is. It's already 9:40. So you need to be talking about these changes now. And for some of you as listing agents, some of your MLSs are already making these changes before the 17th. So you may stop offering co-broke commission today. You have the power to do that today because most MLSs, you can put 0 in the section for co-broke offering of commission. And, you can just let those agents know like, hey, write your offers up, and we'll get into what you can say to agents in a second. But that is how you would handle that. Lending, the VA has a temporary waiver, and I actually have some language I want to put into the chat for you guys. And I hope someone's monitoring this for questions. Oh, this is going to be too long, so I have to do this in chunks. Okay, so the VA has said that, as you may recall, the VA had a prohibition against agents being paid a commission by their customer, right? Their borrower, the VA borrower. And so they have a temporary waiver for that. And sorry, I have to do this in chunks because Zoom won't let me copy and paste a large amount. So there's 3 little pieces here. So copy and paste that and put that in an email for yourself so that you can have that later. But basically the VA said as of they have a temporary waiver on this. It applies to places where the new NAR MLS rules apply and or where broker commissions cannot flow from listing broker to buyer broker, okay? Then the VA borrower can negotiate, number 1. However, this new rule change does not go into effect until August 10th. Okay, so just also know that. But you can also go Google VA NAR changes, and there's lots of articles and information out there for you to go learn more on that. FHA has said so long as it remains customary, meaning so long as sellers keep doing this, a credit or concession by a seller to a borrower for compensation or commissions will not count against the limits on gifts and third-party contributions. So this is really important when we talk about concessions. When you write in these concessions into your purchase and sale agreements, this is important. Listen up. If you're, write this down. Listen to me here. This is important. If you are collecting concessions from a seller, and there's a portion of it going to your fee and a portion of it going to the buyer's closing costs, you need to break that out into 2 places on, you need to write that out into your agreement. So for example, you might say something along the lines of, seller agrees to credit buyer X towards buyers as a seller concession to buyer towards buyers, you know, and then I would put ... number 1, right? And then I would break, let's just say X is the total. We'll say Y towards buyer's agent's commission according to or as per buyer's agreement under the, you know, buyer brokerage agreement, right? So you'll reference that agreement and the little portion that goes out. So that's Y. And then and Z towards buyer's closing costs, prepaids, blah, 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 right? Whatever the language is that you use in your state for those concessions. And the reason why is because there's a good chance that this number is going to be a lot bigger than you guys think it's going to be. And because buyers are going to need not only help with their agent commission, but they're also going to need help with their closing costs. Because the reality, and their other closing costs, because the reality is buyer's commission or buyer's closing costs just went up, right? As a result of the settlement. So in other words, we moved, the seller used to pay the listing broker paid the buyer broker, and that all lived on the seller's side of the settlement statement. This is why it's going to be important to work with your lenders. The buyer agent commission just moved over to the buyer side of the settlement statement, increasing their closing costs. So you're going to need to work with your lenders to help buyers figure out what their total costs are, what's affordable for them, you know, and then what credits do we need? How much in credits? How much in concessions we need, right? And total concessions, not just your compensation. Agents, stop treating concessions like your compensation. It's not just about you. It's about the buyer's entire picture, their entire closing costs. What do they need? It's going to be a lot more potentially than just your compensation, okay? And also, I want to remind you, sellers have 100% paid for a lot of this stuff already, right? In fact, with the unilateral compensation rule, they 100% paid in the past for buyer agents, 100%, right? Now they're getting to at least, so to think that they no longer will pay, I think is not realistic. I think a lot of sellers will still be motivated to pay and help buyers afford to buy their home. They just want an opportunity to be a part of that negotiation. They want to see a complete picture. So anyway, that's my rant on that for a quick second. We'll come back to that in a minute. But stop thinking that sellers won't help or that sellers won't actually pay, because sellers always have, and I think they will continue to in the past. It might look different, and how it all breaks out might look different, but I still think that sellers will be motivated to pay, especially in, certain marketplaces, especially as we transition into buyers markets and things of that nature. So the next is MLS enforcement. NAR has empowered our MLSs to enforce these agreements, right? So this is important because the MLS, this could show up in fines. We've seen fines as high as $5,000 for failure to comply. We've seen MLSs kick you out or threaten to, kick you out of the MLS, things of that nature. We also, they might expect us to inform on one another. We might see MLSs ask you for a copy of your agreements to enforce, right? The worst case scenario is MLSs might actually ask you to send your commission back. That can happen. The MLS may ask and require, like eXp. In fact, we've had to do it before where we didn't have the proper documentation and we were required to send the commission back. So you could actually, if you don't comply with this, there is a real significant risk that you will not get paid, even though you think, you did the work. There's a chance you could not get paid if you do not follow these protocols. So make sure you follow the rules, right? And you pay attention to what your MLS rules are and what they're saying. A lot of them are coming out with guidelines as we speak, if not already. But over the next week or two, you should see some communications from your MLS if you haven't already on these things. Next, open houses. You do not need a buyer. Well, NAR has clarified that you do not need a buyer representation agreement for every unrepresented buyer that walks through an open house. So those of you doing open houses, I expect that we're going to see an increase in open houses, and we're going to see an increase of buyer participation in these open houses, because this is the one way that they can get into a house without signing an agreement, right away. So that's a fact and that's a reality, right? Just a practical consequence of all of this. However, if you are working with that buyer or that buyer has expressed an interest in working with you or wanting to purchase the property, you do need to get an agreement right away so that you can get paid for your services. But NAR has said that as long as you're doing that open house on behalf of the seller, you don't need an agreement for every unrepresented buyer that walks in. But if it's your buyer, you do want to have an agreement with them before they come to your open house, okay? If you haven't done that already. Also for sign calls and online leads, same thing. You don't need an agreement just because they have questions and or they're browsing on your website, hearting and favoriting properties. But as soon as you take over and you start to work with them and you're starting to find them property and schedule showings and do all of that, you need to get an agreement in place because that's the work that are typically a part of brokerage services. Someone browsing on your website, we don't typically charge for that. That's normally a free service. So this screen, take a screenshot. I'm going to skip it because I got too much more to talk about, but this is a script for if you're transitioning someone from the phone to a consultation. This is one way that you can, have something that you say to them to get them to want to meet with you. So take your quick screenshot. Oops. This one here, I'm also not going to go over this. This is an article I wrote. This is a QR code that will take you to an email. So if you do this and you hit send, please do not modify this email at all. Just send it as is. Again, let me say that for people not listening. Send it as is. It will automatically email you a copy of the article. It will link out to Inman for you. And so they have committed to unlock the article. But there's 2 links in there. So you should be able to access the article. And this will talk about how you can build your own unique value proposition. I wrote that article out of frustration I felt like a lot of leaders were saying things like, just articulate your value and treat a buyer like a seller. And I felt like they're not the same. And so, and if you've never done it before, I wanted to give you some guidance on that. So please take a moment to, do the email, the QR code right there. Get the email, read that later at your convenience. And of course, always appreciate your feedback. So best practices in talking to sellers. So there's multiple ways for a buyer's agent to get paid. And actually, I'm going to go to this slide and I'll come back to that one. Don't worry. So because we're no longer commission sharing, right? And I want to bring us back to that. Why aren't we commission sharing anymore? And the reason why is because the apparatus to build and protect that entire strategy has now gone away, right? And I don't mean the MLS, but I mean, if you recall, the whole point of cooperation and the unilateral offer of compensation, that all protected that process, right? It built that process and it protected it, meaning seller would pay listing broker and listing broker would pay buyer broker. That was all part of the cooperation policy. Well, once you take away the requirement for the unilateral offer of compensation, all the protections that went with that go away, meaning how we defended or argued for procuring cause, how we were able to say like, hey, if I show the property, I'm guaranteed from that listing side this fee, right? Like we didn't have to do separate agreements for that, right? There was no agreement for every listing that you had to get or every customer that you had to get securing your commission, because it was guaranteed basically through the MLS, the mechanism of the MLS. Well, that's all gone away now, right? So that there's no need to commission share. Why even have a middleman? There's no need for it. So this is an opportunity for it to be paid more transparently between the parties who actually are going to be paying it, right? So there's no reason for it to flow through the listing agent any longer. You can now be paid directly by the buyer as a buyer's agent, obviously through settlement, right? Through escrow or through the closing of the transaction, but the buyer can pay the buyer's agent, a seller can pay the buyer's agent. There can be a concession from the seller to the buyer that the buyer uses to pay the buyer's agent. And then the fourth way that's not envisioned on here is it can also be a combination, right? So there's a world where a seller pays a portion and a buyer pays a portion. This is a new negotiation strategy that you get to leverage, because you might have a buyer that says, hey, I can actually afford most of this. I just need a little bit of help. And I'm willing to give the seller these terms in exchange for a little bit of help. And that'll help me help pay you. And now there's a whole new world open to you with negotiation strategies. And so meaning the seller pays a portion and the buyer pays a portion. So meaning you can be paid by a combination. So that's really important. And I like to say this because agents, in fact, I got a question this morning, agents wanting to tell a buyer, I will take whatever the seller gives me, right? And, this is my fee, but if the seller offers me less, I'll accept less. You don't have to accept less. Can I say that again for you? You don't have to accept less. If you have a fee that you charge and you feel your worth and everything you're doing justifies that fee, collect your fee. It's okay. I think it's a myth that buyers can't afford buyer's agents. I think it's a myth that people think that sellers will stop paying buyer's agents. These are fears that we have that are unfounded yet, right? There's no proof that this is the case, at least at this point, not so far. Sellers have been paying and, and buyers are still buying homes, right? Some people argue that it's built into the fee that they pay for the house, right? So however way you want to justify, buyers and sellers have been paying our commissions for several decades now. And I think the practice will continue, okay? So it just will look a little differently, okay? So I say that, why did we go no more co-broke or commission sharing? It's like I said, not only did the mechanism for it and the protections for it go away, but we've also seen, I would say quite clearly, that the DOJ or the Department of Justice has basically said multiple ways that they think that whole practice needs to be sunsetted because it doesn't make sense, right? And if you think about it, we should be allowing our buyers and sellers to negotiate all the terms of their transaction so that everyone walks away feeling like they have had a fair chance to reach an agreement that makes sense to them at the time that they're making it, right? So I'll leave that there for you. But there are multiple ways now for a buyer's agent to get paid to put the puzzle pieces all together. And I think these will ultimately make more sense. And as we transition, it'll feel natural over time. We'll get used to the new way shortly. In about 90 days, 6 months from now, we'll look back like, oh, as long as we comply, it's not that bad. We will transition. So let's get into talking to sellers about commissions. When and why might a seller consider paying a commission? So the first thing is, when should a listing agent talk to a seller? I would say at the listing appointment, right? You should be talking to sellers about buyer agents at the listing appointment. However, if nothing else, it's just to prepare them to expect to receive an offer with commission request. And they also may want to talk about concessions. So let's talk about this real quick. I want to spend a little bit of time here. Number one, when a buyer makes an offer, you need to prepare a seller that it's going to look different than you might be used to looking at them, or especially if you get multiple offers. And the reason why I say this is because some buyers are going to instruct their agent to make an offer where they don't ask for any concessions or credits or anything at all, because they can pay for their closing costs. That buyer may prioritize purchase price or other terms, right? Other things that they need. Then you're going to have some buyers who are going to make offers that ask for the seller to pay all of their agent fees, but they can pay their own closing costs. Some buyers are going to instruct their agent to make an offer that says, hey, I need help to pay you and my closing cost. And then you're going to have some buyers who are in the middle saying, hey, I just need a little bit of credit, that just the total amount, that little amount will help me pay for everything. These are the conversations you need to be having with your buyers and your buyer's lender if they're not a cash buyer, right? What is, and how we put all this together, because the truth now is that commission is now a negotiation tool where it wasn't before. You're going to negotiate commissions as the same, and it's going to become a term potentially of the contract the same that way, or not, honestly. The same way you have, purchase price, you have appraisal deadlines, repair deadlines and contingencies, things of that nature, like post-occupancy, pre-occupancy. These are all things that are going to be all part of the bigger picture that customer needs from your help with as their agent to help them achieve the goal of purchasing or selling that home. So you as the agent need to understand all the levers, right? And commission's now part of that. And so you need to prepare sellers that they're going to get offers with all those varying looks, right? Or all those varying requests. Also, a seller may decide they want to offer or agree to pay concessions. But let me give you a word here on both pre-marketing commissions and or pre-marketing concessions. A lot of MLSs are probably going to potentially screw this up. And I say this because the DOJ has also made clear, as well as the plaintiffs, that they are looking for places where we are trying to create loopholes. So that's why I keep telling agents, I will say it over and over and over again, do not treat concessions as if they're a way to offer commission. Okay? Think about how we did in the past. Did a seller ever pre-offer a concession? No. What happened is a buyer would say they needed a concession in order to purchase the house. And then a buyer would say yes or no. Many times I recall it was often sure. It usually wasn't a whole, I'll offer this or I'll offer that. Like it was really like, hey, buyer made an offer, ask for the help. Seller would look at it and say, yeah, I could do that. And it would be and they would negotiate on other things, right? So you don't know as a seller or seller's agent, as a listing agent, how much that buyer's concession needs are going to be. So why would you anchor a seller to a number? Same with buyer agent commissions. You do not know what that buyer and that buyer's agreement have agreed to and or what that buyer needs. So I want to caution you against anchoring clients to a number that ultimately you will be wrong about. So for example, let me give you why. Let's say you tell a seller, hey, I think we should offer X to all buyer's agents to purchase this home. If you have a fiduciary to that seller, I would say that is a mistake, because why? A buyer may work with their buyer agent and negotiate a lower fee. And then as soon as you market it that you're offering a higher fee, that buyer's agent may go and adjust their fee to increase it. And or now they're asking the buyer to asking as a credit to the buyer, one or the other. And now you've cost that seller money. Whereas if you just allow the seller to get the offer and the buyers can make their own offers and they can ask for what they want and what they need, then the seller can evaluate that full picture and decide whether they want to accept it, negotiate it, or reject it. That's number one there. So, or that's one point for you to think about, right? Is if you're anchoring sellers to numbers, whether it's a buyer agent commission or compensation or fee or a concession number, you're committing that seller to potentially pay a number higher than what that buyer would have asked for or needed. So why not say to an agent when they call you? So if you're a listing agent and the buyer agent calls you and says, hey, is the seller willing to pay any compensation or concessions? I would say, if I was a listing agent, assuming I have my seller's permission on this, I would say, absolutely, write it up, send it to me. We're happy to review the complete picture, because you don't know what all the other terms are going to be, right? You don't know if they're going to ask for an extended inspection period, or they're making a low ball offer, or they're offering a higher escrow deposit because they're willing to put more skin in the game. You don't know what that buyer's offer is going to look like until you get it. And it's not until you get it that the seller can make a educated decision about what they're willing to pay or not. Do you understand? I hope you're hearing what I'm saying for both compensation and concessions. So what does that conversation look like to a seller? You might say to a seller, if I'm a listing agent, hi seller, my fee is X for doing A, B, and C, D, and F for you. This is my fee on my side and what I'm willing to, what I charge for my services. And I just want to prepare you that as we go through this process, things have changed. We no longer make unilateral offers of compensation on the MLS, which is a win to you, because now you don't have to decide how much a buyer's agent's worth without ever working with them. The buyer gets to decide what their buyer's agent is worth, and they've committed to an agreement with that buyer about what that value is, right? And what that number is. Now, what happens is that buyer, though, I have to explain to you, seller, what has happened now, because you and I are no longer pre-negotiating and offering an amount to the buyer's agent. Each buyer is going to, the buyer's closing costs just went up, and each buyer is going to evaluate the affordability of your home for themselves. And some buyers might need some help, some might not, but many, I suspect, will need some help. And so if it's okay with you, seller, I would like to tell these agents, because many agents are going to call me, if you're willing to negotiate and pay compensation and or concessions. And with your permission, I'd like to tell them to send over their offer, so that way you, Mr. and Mrs. Seller, or you, Mr. Seller, you, Mrs. Seller, that you can make an informed decision. And you can evaluate each offer in its fullness at the time that you receive it. And the reason why I say this, guys, too, is that how many times have you, as a listing agent, had a conversation with the seller and you said, hey, I really think you should repair the roof. And the seller says, nope, not repairing the roof. I'm not doing it. I'm not doing it. And you say, okay. And then a buyer walks in, makes an offer, and asks for the roof to be repaired. What does the seller do? At that time, they decide to repair the roof, right? So asking a seller to make a decision before they have a complete picture of the outcome, I think can be unfair to that seller. And that's why some sellers make certain decisions, because they don't have a complete picture when making that decision. Whereas once they get the full offer, once they get all the information and the details, they can make a complete decision about the offer, right? So that's why I say, be careful anchoring customers to numbers, because it erodes trust. When you tell a seller, just offer X, that'll be great. And then the buyer comes and asks for X, Y, and Z. And now the seller's frustrated because you told them all they needed to do was X. This is a whole new world that we're walking into, guys. And we need the mindset shift that this could actually be a win for everyone, right? Because buyers get some control back, sellers get some control back, buyers agents get some control back, listing agents get some control on their fee and not having to divvy it up between themselves and another party. And if, let's say, you are the listing broker and an agent and a buyer, you might also say, I'm going to have a buyer. Do you negotiate some? I can't read the comments, but I'm sure this is a question. What do I do if I'm the listing agent and I have my own buyer? What do I do at the listing appointment? Same conversation. Say, seller, There's going to be buyers that come with you and ask for offers of assistance. I want you to know, just like I've got every other buyer out there working hard to find you a buyer, I'm also may find you a buyer. And I just need you to know that that buyer and I, we also will have an agreement between ourselves on what my fees are for working with them. And they will instruct me on whether or not to ask you for help or not. So I don't know what that's going to look like until I talk to them and they hire me and we agree on the fee for the services that they need, right? So that's one way that you can handle that scenario, okay? So again, some tips on conversations. It's a marketing incentive to the buyer, not the agent. You want to use commission as a negotiation tool. You also want the seller thinking about buyer affordability because buyers' closing costs just went up, right? So it's no longer just their pricing that a buyer has to consider. They also have to consider their closing cost, right? And so before, the offer that they would make, their agent commission was included in that. Now, if you don't pay it, seller, that's on top of their closing costs. So now they have to pay your ask price plus these additional fees. So that may reduce what they spend money on, right? So it's one of those things you have to explain it to a customer so that they understand why they may want to offer compensation depending on their list price, right? And so they might want to price it accordingly, right? Along those lines. Also, don't forget your net sheets. There's going to be some buyers, like I said, who instruct their agents not to request anything. And they might make an offer that's below list price versus another customer or buyer who will make an offer above list price, but ask for concessions. And that first offer might be better net to the seller than the other one. So not only are you paying attention to all the other terms, the deadlines and contingencies, but now you're also looking at the net sheet in a more detailed way and in a different way than before, because you never know what that buyer's going to instruct their agent to do. And agents, hear me on this. It's the customer's direction or the customer's decisions direct your actions. Sorry, let me say this right. I messed that one up. The customer's decisions direct your actions. Stop making decisions on behalf of your customer. Let them make them. You give them, great advice. You give them your wisdom, your advice, your instruction, your, consultation, but it's up to the customer to make the decisions and then direct you on behaviors to take after that, right? Also, one final thing here, listing agents, you do not need a copy of the buyer's broker agreement or the buyer's agreement. Those agreements are confidential between the buyer's agent and the buyer. So listing agents, you don't need to ask for them, and buyer's agents, you don't need to send them to the listing agent with your offer or anything like that. You're not required to do that. The only caveat is if your state requires you to do something, right? If your state or local rules require you to submit your agreement somewhere, then that's one thing. But between brokerages, you don't need to do that. So where to focus going forward? I'm gonna go fast here so I can open this up to questions and documents. Focus on the facts, not your fears. Fear is a result of a lack of knowledge and lack of experience, right? So a lot of your fear is because you have not experienced this new way before, and that's normal. That makes sense, but you can't focus on that. There's nothing you can do about the experience part, number one. Number two, we're all experiencing it together. By focusing on knowledge and gaining information, that is going to help you mitigate your fear. So do trainings like this. Go to the trainings the state brokers are doing on the documents, things of that nature. Improve your negotiation skills. That's going to be the number one ROI for agents who want to thrive within, going into the new world. You're going to be negotiating with the buyer just to get an appointment all the way through to the end of contract and terms. So work on those negotiation skills. Focus on what buyers want and what their fears are. This is another screenshot. This is some scripting that I got from that I came up with, being taught exactly what to say for real estate agents and magic phrases and how to use magic phrases to objection handle and things like that. So take a screenshot here really quick, and because I'm not going to read that to you. And then what tools do we have access to at eXp? Listing agents. If you're not leveraging express offers, you should be. First of all, it is a proven marketing strategy to leverage cash offers to get into the door for a listing. Okay. So if you're looking to grow your listing business, leverage tools like cash offers, express offers. Not only do we work with Open Door, and we have a super streamlined, easy process with Open Door, we have over 40 other buyers across the country in our platform. So there's tons of opportunity for buy box here, right? And a cash offer doesn't work for everybody, but it will certainly get you in the door. And then when it's right for the right client, it can also potentially achieve their goals, which is maybe saving time, energy, or money because they don't want to do certain things, right? Sometimes it's even rehab, for example. That's number one. eXp exclusives. Guys, join Zenlist. You know what I want to remind you right here? We are the largest brokerage in the nation who sells the most homes. We have the opportunity to have the largest off-market inventory in the country. Let me say it again for the people in the back. We have the opportunity to have the largest off-market inventory in the property or in the country. Let me tell you, you might not think being off-market is in the best interest of a seller. How do you know? Every seller is different. For some sellers, it is a good transition period before they go on market, right? You never know. We are transacting. We are closing properties off market between eXp agents, which is fabulous. Not only that, think about the value proposition for you as a buyer's agent. Buyers have FOMO, fear of missing out on the home of their dreams. If you can also give them access to an entire inventory of homes that are not on a market yet, and that they can only get by working with you and the eXp agent, that is a massive value proposition going into tomorrow's world, right? So get involved in Zenlist, get signed up and get transitioned into that. Also, we have the eXp documents and state trainings. Our states are doing trainings right now. In fact, Florida is doing training today and tomorrow. They did 3 trainings last week with the lovely Ann Shaheen. You know, we are providing you trainings on the documents and all of this material. So please attend that so that you can get crystal clear. I personally, too, am in conversations with a lot of the state brokers all over the country. They come to me and ask clarifying questions. So we are all powwowing together to make sure we give you the best advice possible navigating this new world. So some of the forms that we have that are eXp documents we have the direct pay, seller direct pay, which is a confirmation of compensation from the seller. You can leverage that. You can use our non-exclusive buyer brokerage agreement, our single property buyer rep agreement, our disclosure and acknowledgement of non-representation. That's for those bottom 3 are for our listing agents. The amendment to the real estate listing agreement and exclusive listing agreement 2.0. Those are all available for you now. And every state is doing trainings. Except Colorado, these forms have not been accepted yet. So, but if you're outside the state of Colorado, you should be able to leverage these documents. So definitely go to the trainings. And Colorado hopefully we'll go through those process and hopefully that'll be coming soon. So with that being said, I'm barely left us time to chat. And I apologize because I'm sure there's tons of questions in the chat, but this last QR code is for the NAR FAQs. So again, NAR can only bring us so close to the finish line. Okay, there's only so much they can answer. You'll even see it in their answers. There's some things they just cannot answer because of antitrust, right? And so that becomes, so the gap that you see is for the broker to decide. That's what people don't understand, why having the right brokerage and the right broker support you matters, because there's a gap between the NAR settlement and the finish line of all of these changes that we have to go through. And in that gap exists things like sharing commissions, concessions, dual agency, enforcement. I mean, I could make a list. I have a list, right? I'll be talking about an event at the RAS Media CEO and Leadership event and next month. You know, we'll be talking about risk and all the legal landmines, right? And that exists in that gap between how far NAR can take us and the finish line. So your brokerage matters. And if you are a broker, you need help, eXp, we are trying to help as well. So let us know and we're here to help. So with that being said, I'm going to stop sharing. Hopefully you downloaded that QR code. Save that in your favorites. Like I said, it's the NAR FAQs. It's gotten a lot better since they added it 3 months ago. And let's see what questions make sense to answer for the group. All right.
Kendall, thank you so much. What an amazing job in articulating that. Thank you for taking time. I do have the questions organized for you if you want me to just read them out to you, and then you could take it from there unless you have them on your end.
Nope, you do it, Queen. I'm not going to try and go read through that now.
Okay, perfect. So the first question is from Linda. Linda says the new eXp buyer broker agreement doesn't say exclusive on the top, but it does say exclusive in the contents of the form. Can this be added to the eXp form on the top? Can the form be modified, I guess, is her question.
So our document as it is today is a result of agent feedback. So you guys asked us for a document that was easy to explain, easy to understand, and easy for a customer to sign. That is why it's a non-exclusive agreement. It, through its iterations, I know because I saw it while it was being edited and worked on. It was exclusive at one point. There was a thought of making exclusive. Since then, we ended up going non-exclusive again after agent feedback. And so that's why you have the document that you have today. Our document has been praised by the Consumer Federation of America. It has been acknowledged by multiple outlets and streams that it is a document that is consumer centric and, you know, basically consumer safe, right? So I think that's really important, you know, when you, the more you guys want to add, and, you know, I know Leo said at one point about having hot, medium, and mild hot sauce, right? I don't know what our future holds. And I'm not saying our agreements won't evolve over time. You know, maybe we'll see an additional agreement come out. But right now, this is the best that we could give you in the time that we've had. That is something that you can get out and utilize right away. So, but the goal here is to eventually add any state requirements to those agreements. So in your local marketplaces, it is a complete package that you can utilize in your state marketplace. So can you write exclusive at the top? Please don't do that. Don't modify the agreement on your own. You are not allowed to use your own agreements. You either need to use our eXp form or a state form, right? So if I could be clear there, that would be my clarity.
I love the lawyer talk too. Thank you so much. Okay, second one. This is a very, very important one. And I just want to thank you because you are pouring into the industry in a way that, you know, I know there's people here from all different brands. So today's brand agnostic, guys. I want to remind you guys, we are mentioning eXp because we are proud. Brokerage does matter to us, but if this is open to everyone, that I've heard a lot of. What about referrals? Kendall, you're referring a client to you. What type of transparency needs to be given to the consumer? Because in the past, I'm just referring to my friend Kendall, but there's no true transparency on the exchange of compensation. Can you please answer that? That was a question from Narda.
Yeah, great question. So actually the question I normally get is, does this impact referrals at all? And the answer to that question is the settlement agreement doesn't impact referrals. Referrals can occur as they always have. There's no mechanism in the settlement agreement that impacts referral agreements, okay? That's not answering her question. Her question is, can we create transparency? I think sure, that could be your choice to disclose to a customer what your fee is for referring them to someone else. But there's nothing in the NAR settlement that requires any change to that.
Okay, perfect. So that you can do so, but this is not part of the settlement. So referrals are not obligated to disclose compensation. That's how. Third question is, if this is okay, this is from Taz. She's like, do the sliding scale. If this is our business and we can do a menu of services, why can't a sliding scale be a part of it?
Well, you can do, I charge X for A, B, C, and I charge Y for D, E, F, right? So you could, for example, what does that look like in reality? I charge X if I show you 10 homes or less, and I charge you Y if I show you 11 homes or more. So meaning this is objectively ascertainable because a buyer can say, oh, I only looked at 7 homes, my fee to my agent is X, versus, oh, I looked at 13, my fee is Y. So you can do that. I don't know if there's something else different. Now, I will say this to Taz or anyone else on there. Like I said, I'll reiterate, menu of services is something that has to be allowed in your state. Again, some states do not allow menu of services that impact fiduciary duties. So you cannot charge less and reduce your fiduciary in a state where that's not allowed. I hope that makes, for those, trust me, for those of you like in Arizona, if anyone's on the call from Arizona, they know what I'm talking about. For example, that's been like the best part of this job. I now understand, like I said, by the end of this, I will have taught this class in at least 40 states, maybe 42, something like that. So it's taught me a lot about how
that's a great segue into our next question. Our next question actually comes from California. And it says, builders do not accept BBAs in California. We're required to have one for showing new builds. That question comes from Lisa Sharp.
Say that again. You cut out a little bit, Veronica.
Built in California. Are we have one for when showing new builds? This question is Lisa Sharp from California.
Okay. A builder doesn't control your relationship with your buyer. Is that what it is? So let me ask the question because you were cutting out.
Yes,
is that right?
Exactly that. Correct.
Does the first don't require it or don't allow it or something like that? Okay. If you are, I'm assuming you're not working for a builder. You're a buyer's agent who shows new construction. And you're not an employee of a builder, right? So that's different. I'm not talking about employees. I'm talking about independent contractors who have a buyer and they're showing new construction. Builders don't control your BBA. You still have to have one with your customer because you are an NAR member. In fact, anyone on here who's in a MLS who is opted out of the settlement, let me clue you in on something. You are, as an NAR member, you are still required to comply, regardless of whether your MLS has opted in or opted out, because you're an NAR member. If you choose as an NAR member not to comply because you're choosing to follow your MLS or, you know, whatever, your broker, not eXp, right? You will open yourself up to litigation, right? So if you're an NAR dues paying member, you are required to comply. I don't care what anyone else is doing. Great
summary. Great way to do that. Okay. We have a number of questions that we may going to be with Kendall this week. So I will make sure that these questions she will get maybe a recap, but we will get these videos these answers for you and put it in the form of a video. We don't get to all the questions. What will happen to our listing that we currently have showing offer of compensation? We already answered that. And if you go back and listen to the replay, that she emphasized that question. An agent just asked this: if an agent writes an offer, gets it accepted, but it did not get the buyer's agreement signed first, turns in fee, they catch it in compliance, no buyer's agreement signed. This is a pretty long question.
I'm going to say can
they backdate the buyer's agreement?
I would say that arguably that could be considered fraud. So please just comply, my friends. It's not hard. It's not hard. The fact that you're asking that, think about all your ethical obligations, right? Is that ethical to backdate a document? It's not considered ethical to do that, right? So let's just say that. But I will say this, if you don't have your documents in order, you run the risk of not getting paid, you run the risk of a massive fine, you run the risk of getting kicked out of your MLS, and or, repeated dramas and traumas. You might get kicked out of your brokerage. I don't know. I mean, I'm not saying eXp is going to be kicking anybody out. I'm not saying that. This is not about eXp. I'm just saying, period. If you refuse to comply with the rules, there will be consequences. To me, the worst of which being not getting paid and or getting fined. Significant. Okay. Plus fines, some of them.
Yeah, and Kendall, I was discussing with Leo, and we're looking at some of the hefty fines already that are being rolled out from some of the other states already. I mean, California, and we anticipate more. So guys, this is something very serious. This workaround that people are trying to
to find is part of the problem that we have today. Just be honest, just be transparent, just follow the rules, and we're going to do business. We're still going to sell real estate. Okay, so we already talked about how referrals works and that referrals are not part of the settlement. To confirm, can I advertise a listing that is not my own to the social media community?
I mean, again, as long as you follow your marketing your state rules, state and local rules on marketing. Remember, you can do a video. Let's say you can still just follow the rules, right? That have always existed. That hasn't changed.
Okay. And I'm going to do a couple more questions and then we're going to wrap up because I know you have a hard stop, Kendall.
Yeah. I might have a little bit more time.
So a question that's very important that's been being brought up a lot. What about teams? Teams. You've got a team that has team listings. They have buyer agents. These buyer agents take the calls. They do open houses. How does this apply to teams and agents who are representing the team and the team listings?
Yeah, that's a big question. And I got to think about that into micro pieces. So on the listing side, for example, where that's common is open houses. Can a team member still do an open house for a team's listing? Yes, all of that is normal. And I guess whoever wrote that question, if you could be a bit more specific, like maybe in the chat, right, more specifically, like, what do you mean by all of this in teams? Because if you're asking, like, can you have one team agreement that applies to all the team members? I would say probably not. And I would say that depends because we have in some states designated agency, right? So, so some of those varying nuances of agency and things like that would prohibit you from having like one agreement that covers everyone in the team. But you should also put in there, for example, another question about team I heard before is, what if I have I'm a team and I have showing agents on my team who just go and show property for me, but I'm the one the agreements with, and I'm collecting a commission and I'm going to pay out accordingly. Like, I believe like you don't need an agreement for yourself plus each showing agent. I think you can have your agreement as long as you're the agent being paid, and then or the primary agent on the transaction, and then you can split it out with your team members according to your brokerage, however your brokerage allows you to do that, right? Or some people pay showing agents like per door, right? Like you're paying that out of pocket. So that showing agent wouldn't need an agreement with that buyer before showing it. It would be covered under your agreement that you have with them because you have a buyer showing or an agent showing on your behalf. Is how I would interpret that. But I mean, I feel like that's too big of a question and there's too many potential angles that unless I had more specifics, it would be.
So one of the specific questions for the teams was, does it work the same if an agent on our team shows our listing? Can they show off of a sign call and no BBA would they still be considered would they still be considered showing on behalf of the seller since it's a team listing?
I would say this: does your buyer agent plan or expect to get paid for showing that house on your listing? If the answer is yes, then they need an agreement.
Perfect.
Right?
Sometimes so then that's a really great graph. If this, then this, right? If your buyer's agent who is showing that home and is going to anticipates getting paid by the buyer, then there needs to be an agreement. If you have an agreement that you're paying them as a showing assistant for your listing through your listing compensation, and that buyer and they're not going to enter into a relationship with the buyer for that particular home, then I guess the answer is no.
Yeah.
And again, this is evolving, guys, and we are learning as we go. All of us are. So these are all great questions. No question is.
Yeah. It also, there's also this concept of non-represented or unrepresented buyers, right? A lot of agents, like if you're a listing agent, so let me tell you this, listing agents, listen here. Number one, please do not work for free for a buyer. Can I say that again? Please do not work for free for a buyer. You will cannibalize and erode the entire industry if you do that. I don't care what you charge, just do not do it for free, right? Unrepresented buyer or not, right? That's I mean, don't work for free is my point. What you charge is what you charge. And so, but I would say this, unrepresented buyers are tricky. I always believed, as a former listing agent, I did not like working with unrepresented buyers who were not very sophisticated. So like if it's a very sophisticated investor, that investor could, typically they have their own contracts, they can write their own agreements, like they really don't need my help. But if they're a first-time home buyer, that is not a good candidate for an unrepresented buyer. Now, you can't make a customer hire an agent. You cannot make them hire an agent. But that would be something that I think is really going to be a bad experience for the buyer, for the seller, and for that listing agent in the middle. That's just, and you ask any agent who's done it in the past, they all tell you the same thing. It's usually not a good experience all the way around. So I recommend that you avoid that whenever possible.
So, Kendall, I want to bring Kathy up because she had the question, but I didn't ask it correctly. I'm going to have her specifically ask the question on behalf of the agent when it came to the buyer agreement not being signed prior to. Kathy, are you there?
I am here.
Hi.
So I had a couple of agents bring this up, and actually my compliance manager brought it up too, because she's used to cleaning up everybody's messes, right, after the contract gets done. So the question around what we were saying about what happens in the case that somebody has had their head in the sand and did not listen and did not comply, wrote the contract in a hurry, didn't realize their buyer maybe didn't sign the buyer agency agreement. They turn the contract in. eXp compliance goes, hey, wait a minute, there's not a buyer agency here. So now the agent's thinking, oh, I got to scramble and go back and get it signed. It wasn't about backdating necessarily. My question is, there's probably going to be a scenario or two where this happens, where somebody who didn't pay attention and wrote that contract, or maybe their buyer agency's expired or something. If it comes up in compliance and there was a gap and there was not a buyer agency signed when that contract was written, is that a 0% commission?
My first answer is yes.
That's what I think.
That's the simple answer. I think that think there's a good chance it's going to be yes. They're not getting. There's a good chance they're not getting paid. Number one. Number two,
even though they wrote it into the contract. If they wrote it into the contract, it doesn't matter if they don't have a buyer agency, because it's the equivalent to a 0, right? Just like.
Correct.
Okay, that's what I was thinking.
Yep. It's
well, and with that being said, oh, sorry.
I'm sorry. Let me just say this too. But this is the thing. I'm going to tell agents now, going forward, whoever accidentally takes a listing without a signed listing agreement and puts it in the MLS, nobody. So you are not going to be able to get it. And I'm not talking to you, Kathy. I'm talking to the audience.
Oh, I know.
You are not to get away with the excuse of, oh, well, I didn't realize. That's not going to work. That is not going to work. That is fool's thinking that you think no one does that. And so no one accidentally fails to get a listing agreement signed and then puts it in the MLS. So think of it the same way. No one should accidentally not get a buyer agreement signed while then simultaneously writing a buyer contract and trying to go pending. Don't do that. And maybe in the next 90 days, we might see a little, but a few people, like you said, Kathy, not getting paid, I think that's going to clean that behavior right up. And so you're not going to be able to get mad at your broker. You're not going to get mad at compliance. These are the rules. These are state laws. State laws require us to have brokers pay according to whatever the rules are, right? Like state rules there. NAR agreement, it's not a state rule. It's not a federal rule. It is right now the terms of a settlement agreement, but it's really a rule as a part of our membership, as a part of a trade organization, and that in exchange for being a part of this organization, there's all these things we get for that, right? And so with being a part of that comes, we agree to have a code of ethics. We get access to an MLS. We, get to, market our listings to, brokers and agents across the world, really, a lot of us, because of it. You know, we have these signed listing agreements. We have signed buyer agreements. It makes sense, you know, and I know Kathy and Veronica agree with this because we've talked about this. We've been on, hey, the three of us have done this conversation together a few times, but like, these are, you know, contractual obligations that does become a part of like actual laws, right? Is when you have these written agreements and things like that, that actually is something that starts to tie in that way. And so just follow the new, the new journey, guys. It's a new journey that we're on. I think it's going to be great for the industry. Ultimately, potentially has the opportunity to be great for the industry because one, buyer's agents get hired. You were not being hired before, and you would have customers ghost you and things like that. We all want to raise the bar professionalism. This does that, right? So I just want to encourage you guys all to, you know, continue to get educated. Maybe stop resisting a little bit, or stop thinking like this isn't happening. It's happening. It's happened. It's happening. And, you know, and even if, so for that one doubter out there, because I know there's always one or two who thinks that this is not going to make it past November, let me tell you this, NAR can still make these changes. It doesn't need the approval of the settlement to make these changes. These are trade organization changes that they're making, trying to protect the industry, trying to protect us against further litigation on antitrust, for example. That is a real thing. And I'm going to give you one more scenario. Sorry, Veronica, because I know I said at our stop, but this is too important. And there's too many people on this call to get this. How did we get here? We got here because you can call 3 plumbers in Tampa, 3 plumbers in Atlanta, and 3 plumbers in California, and I will get 9 to 10 different quotes. Same with lawyers. Same with the surgeon, right? This is why we shop surgeons. You call 3 realtors in Tampa, 3 realtors in Atlanta, and 3 realtors in California, and guess what? You're going to get almost exactly the same fee, same verbiage. That's the problem. That's one of them. The second problem is because of the unilateral offer of compensation and the seller's inability to negotiate their offers, and they would have to pay a same fee regardless of what offer came in if they ultimately agreed to the fee. The other problem with that too is that you could have a very experienced agent like, you know, a Kathy or Veronica get paid the same as a brand new agent, you know, Kendall Bonner 10 years ago. How is that fair? How does that make any sense? It doesn't. So this is how we got here. And it's ripe for our industry to make changes. And I said it last year. I said we had the opportunity to proactively make changes on our own, or we would be bullied or forced to make changes if we didn't on our own. And we chose not to on our own. So this is where we're at. And I think NAR did the best they could with putting something together that satisfied as many needs as possible, while also protecting the industry as a whole, because it's bigger than you and I as people. We are in the largest financial industry in the world, real estate. More money is transacted in real estate. It's a multi-billion-dollar industry. And it's too important to American wealth generation and all of that to be anything different. Okay, so I'm sorry. Off my rant.
Well, no, this is great. And one of the things I want people to do is know where they can stay plugged in. So I just posted our channel that we have on Instagram, which is a channel where you go in frequently and give updates. And there's also a lawsuit and leadership Facebook group. I think, is there another group that you have, Kendall, that you'd like people to follow, or they can stay plugged in to continue to follow these, you know, obviously this change and how it continues to evolve? We have a lot of people wanting to stay plugged in.
Yeah, so on my Instagram, I'm doing trying to do it daily. I missed 2 days last week, but intentionally. A 60-minute reel or video on something each day as we do this countdown, because like I said, we're down to 15 business days between now and the 17th. We're 3 weeks in, so you can stay connected. So I'll be posting content there. I also, if you're at eXp has, well, whether you are or not, you can access eXp's YouTube channel. We have a NAR channel playlist with content in there. I'm actually going to be filming another video and also about, you know, what I'm calling the Great Temptation and how to avoid it. And so I'll be posting that to my YouTube and asking eXp to add it on theirs. Another great place where I'll be doing content and others is on Inman. I'll be writing more for them. I'm going to be doing a FAQ. So they have done a call out for FAQs. And Veronica, any that you didn't get answered today, send them to me. I'll add them to that list for Inman. And I'm doing a live, or maybe it won't be live, but a whole video and article on real questions, real answers, and just the, you know, broken up over time between probably over the next 30 days or so. So I'll be doing more of that as well. So thank you guys. Thank you, Veronica, for letting me do this. Veronica and I had been talking about, she was like, can you do something for my team? And I was like, can I do it for Global Alliance? Because I just feel like this is so big. And I've been
we do
getting
it for
so
the industry, right? It's for everybody.
many people ask me one-off questions, and I'm like, how can I know you're not the only one with that same question. So thank you, everyone, for being here. And thank you, Vero. Thank you, Kathy, my other good friend, and everyone on the call.
Yes, guys. And if you know anybody that would benefit from this recording, you can find this recording. It'll be on our Global Alliance YouTube page, and it's free of access. You don't have to put any email. You could just share it. We want to be industry leaders, regardless of brokerage affiliation. We want our peers and our colleagues to be educated because we are learning together. So this is one of those moments that you can reach out to your industry friends and peers and say, hey, regardless of whatever brokerage you're at, this was worth watching. Thank you, Kendall. Thank you, Kathy, for doing the unexpected appearance and all the questions. You guys were amazing. We had over 250 people at 270 at the peak, staying on for the majority of the time. So this is a topic that people are thirsty for. And we're so grateful for you, Kendall, for leading, you know, and you and Leo at the helm of this, and Holly, and just making bold choices and being front and center. Your confidence exudes. I'm so grateful for you. And yes, we're in this together. So thank you guys. Have an amazing Monday. And we will be here for you every step of the way.
Bye.
Bye-bye.